In
Yeah.
the 19th century, um, Leo Tolstoy created this, I mean, it's a really ruthless, uncompromising diagnostic test to identify what he called false art.
Mm-hmm.
And today, we're going to take that exact same 19th century test and use it to evaluate a 99-cent chocolate bar, the kind just sitting in the checkout aisle of your local grocery store.
Right.
And in the process of doing that, we're going to figure out why you were likely scheduling your entire life completely backward.
Yeah, which is, well, it is quite the jump.
It is.
But when you start looking at the hidden architecture of how we spend our time, those dots actually connect incredibly fast because, we spend our days just slotting our actual lives into these tiny 30-minute gaps between meetings and errands and all these obligations.
Yeah, exactly.
We treat our own existence like an afterthought, really.
We really do.
Yeah.
I mean, we treat our calendars like a game of Tetris that we were just spectacularly losing. And that brings us to the core thesis of this deep dive. Because the entrepreneur and author Chip Conley has this quote that completely flips this script. He argues, he says, we should strive to make our obligations work around what's important rather than trying to squeeze what's important around our obligations.
Right. And you say it out loud, and it sounds like common sense, right?
Yeah.
But actually attempting to live that way, it requires a profound, almost a violent shift in how you orient yourself to the world. It requires you to just stop forcing outcomes.
Okay, let's unpack this because today we have a massive stack of sources trying to answer one fundamental question. And that question is, do we get the best results? Whether that's in art or in business, raising our kids, or even just managing our own minds. Do we get those results by forcefully engineering an outcome? Or by creating the right conditions for something to just authentically become what it is?
Yeah.
Think of it like trying to get a fire going in your backyard. You can't just stand there and command a spark to become a bonfire. You can't enforce a corporate deadline on a piece of kindling.
Right, right.
You can only gather the right dry wood, create a little windbreak, provide enough oxygen, and then just let the physics of the fire take over. You manage the environment, not the flame.
That framework is just vital because in almost every single domain we explore today, the ultimate failure state is mistaking control for cultivation.
Cool.
We carry this deeply industrial assumption that if we just grip a situation tighter, or if we micromanage the details and apply enough pressure, well, then we're going to get the exact result we want.
Right, like tightening a bolt.
Exactly. But our sources argue that this is structurally impossible. Real magic or, real quality, it just cannot be manufactured by sheer force.
And to understand why it can't be manufactured, we have to establish how we even measure what is real versus what is manufactured. So let's bring Tolstoy back into this.
Let's do it. So in his Calendar of Wisdom, Tolstoy basically comes out swinging. He claims there is no domain of language more deeply misused than the criticism of art.
Really?
Yeah. And specifically because we lack a working definition for false art. So he argues that modern society is just drowning in false art because we've completely forgotten how to spot it.
So how does he diagnose a fake then? Because that seems entirely subjective, doesn't it?
Well, he defines the real thing by what it resists. So he brings in the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer to explain the sort of psychological mechanism behind this.
Okay.
And Schopenhauer points out that great art leaves its deepest impression exactly where the intellect actually fails to fully explain it.
Oh, wow. Meaning, if I can completely articulate why a painting is good, the painting isn't actually doing that much work.
Yes, exactly. Think about the psychology of resonance. If a piece of art can be neatly deconstructed into this logical formula, like if it yields completely to intellectual explanation, it's just a puzzle.
Huh.
And once the human brain solves a puzzle, it discards it, right?
Yeah.
It moves on. But real art, it bypasses the analytical brain and hits something primal. It leaves a residue of mystery.
It's the difference between reading the chemical formula for a teardrop and actually crying.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like the formula is neat, it's understandable, but it doesn't move you.
Exactly. And Tolstoy layers in the philosopher Henri Frédéric Emile to take this a step further, because Emile argues that real art doesn't complicate the world with all this jargon or layers of academic theory.
Right.
It actually simplifies the world. It takes the opaque, really messy mysteries of the human experience, and it makes them evident. It clarifies them.
So it cuts through the noise.
Yes. And then Tolstoy brings in the English thinker John Ruskin, who lays down this really strict ethical rule for creation. Ruskin says nothing wonderful is ever produced by competition, and nothing noble is ever produced by pride.
Okay, I have to throw a flag on the play here.
Go for it.
Because applying an anti-competition, totally anti-profit mindset, it seems incredibly romantic, but practically impossible in the modern world. Like, if I'm a freelance graphic designer or an architect or a writer, and my primary goal on a Tuesday morning is to finish a project so I can pay my mortgage, am I automatically producing false art? Are we saying any creation tied to a paycheck is inherently compromised?
What's fascinating here is that Tolstoy isn't condemning the existence of money,
Okay.
right? Nor is he demanding that artists just starve in a garret somewhere. He is challenging the orientation of the creator. It's a question of what sits in the driver's seat.
I see.
If the pursuit of profit or the desire to just crush a competitor, if that dictates the reality of the work, like if you are altering the truth of your design just to hit a specific metric or win an award, well, that is the moment it becomes false.
Right, because you are letting an external structure dictate the internal reality of the thing you are making.
Precisely.
That distinction makes a lot of sense. The motive is the condition. So if the condition is purely beat the competitor, make $1, the art is forced to conform to that really narrow, lifeless box. It just becomes a commodity.
And this brings us directly out of the 19th century art gallery and drops us right into aisle 4 of your local grocery store.
Here we go.
Yeah. So Seth Godin recently wrote this brilliant strategy essay analyzing the global chocolate industry. And without ever mentioning Tolstoy, he applies Tolstoy's exact criteria to modern, brutal capitalism.
Godin takes a really hard look at commodity chocolate, right?
Yeah.
The millions of identical mass-produced bars sitting at every single checkout counter in the world. He frames this entire system as the ultimate manifestation of false art.
Because it operates at an industrial scale where the structure entirely dictates the reality of the product.
Yeah.
The commodity chocolate system is optimized purely for market share, for maximum profitability, and for shelf position. It's exactly the competitive pride Ruskin warned about, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And because of that optimization, the system is fundamentally indifferent to the actual flavor of the cacao. It replaces these beautiful complex flavors with emulsifiers, waxes, and excess sugar just to maximize shelf life.
And far worse than the flavor, I mean, the system is indifferent to the dignity of the farmers.
Exactly.
The corporate structure rewards low costs at all times, which drives the economics of the supply chain down to poverty wages, and in some, well-documented cases, actual slave labor.
Right. It is the exact failure state Tolstoy described, just scaled up to a massive global supply chain. But, and this is key, Godin doesn't just point at the wreckage.
Right. He offers alternatives.
Yes. He highlights counterexamples, businesses that are operating on a conditions, not control model, and they perfectly fit the definition of real art.
Like Tuta McCucken, right?
Right.
The founder of Tony's Chocolate Only.
Exactly. Tony's is a massive brand now. I mean, they hold nearly a fifth of the entire Dutch chocolate market. But Van de Keuken was a journalist. He didn't even want to be a CEO.
Right. His entire motivation was just this visceral frustration over the use of slave labor in the West African cacao trade. He didn't start the company to capture market share or to make a fortune. He started it out of a calling and sacrifice. It was almost as a last resort because the existing industrial machine just refused to change.
And then you have Sean Askinosie of Askinosie Chocolate. Godin highlights how Sean paired ethical sourcing with something called open book management.
And we really need to look at the mechanics of this because open book management isn't just a corporate buzzword here.
No, not at all.
It means he literally sits down with the farmers in Tanzania or the Philippines. He translates the company's financial statements into their local language and shows them the exact profit margins.
Which completely dismantles the traditional power dynamic.
Totally.
In commodity chocolate, the buyer holds all the information, right? They dictate the terms from the top down. But by opening the books, Askinosie shifts the relationship from a strict hierarchy to a horizontal partnership. It distributes the power.
And then there's Original Beans, which is a company that takes this ethos so far. They actually use their profits to actively regenerate the landscapes where they farm, like planting millions of trees.
Yeah.
None of these companies started by optimizing for massive scale. They didn't try to forcefully command a global footprint.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Godin is delivering a masterclass on the actual mechanics of how change spreads. Because we have this really persistent myth that change happens vertically, like a hero arrives, takes control of the machine, and commands a better system from the top down.
Right, the savior complex.
Yeah. Exactly. But Godin argues that meaningful change actually spreads horizontally through culture.
Culture being the slow, accumulated interaction of individual people over time.
Yes, you cannot dictate a cultural shift. You just can't compete your way into a more ethical supply chain any more than a painter can compete their way into nobility.
Wow, right.
You have to create a new story, you have to prove that it works and make it available, you create the conditions, and you trust the ecosystem to adopt it horizontally.
So what does this all mean? I think we can boil this down to the profound difference between trying to build a machine versus tending a garden.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Commodity chocolate, or false art, operates like a machine. The people at the top demand control over every single gear. They want to optimize every microsecond, dictate every outcome, and just squeeze the life out of the process, all in the name of efficiency. But ethical chocolate, or real art, or real change, it operates like a garden. You don't walk out to a tomato plant and scream at it to grow faster.
Right.
You can't micromanage your root system. You just manage the soil quality, you make sure there's sunlight, you pull the weeds, and you let the plant do what its internal DNA already knows how to do.
That metaphor captures the underlying mechanism perfectly. You manage the environment, not the organism.
And if forcefully engineering a global commodities market leads to systemic failure, just imagine the damage we do when we apply that exact same industrial mindset to raising a human being.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's pivot from the boardroom to the living room.
The transition from business strategy to parenting, it's stark, but the underlying flaw is identical.
It is. Ryan Holiday's book, The Daily Dad, tackles this head on. He brings in this quote from the anonymous street artist Banksy that is just brutally sharp. Banksy says, "Parents will do anything for their kids except let them be themselves."
Oof. It stings, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because it identifies our deepest parental instinct. We mistake control for cultivation. Parents will often try to mold a child into a very specific, predetermined shape. Maybe it's to, fulfill the parent's own unlived ambitions or to fit a very narrow societal definition of success.
Right, they act like the commodity chocolate executives.
Yeah.
They treat the child as raw material to be optimized for a specific outcome, rather than an independent organism with its own authentic shape.
To illustrate the alternative, Holiday shares this incredible story about Bruce Springsteen.
I love this story.
It's so good. So Bruce is 7 years old, sitting in his living room, and he sees Elvis Presley perform on The Ed Sullivan Show, and he is completely mesmerized. Now, his mother did not have spare money lying around in the 1950s.
No.
But she notices this undeniable spark in her son, so she scrapes together just enough cash, and she goes to a local music shop.
And she doesn't buy him a stadium.
Yeah.
She doesn't hire a team of managers. She just rents him a guitar.
The fact that it was a rental is actually the most important part of the story.
Right, low pressure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She wasn't making this high-stakes financial investment that demanded an ROI. She didn't hand him the instrument and say, look, I sacrificed for this, so you need to practice 4 hours a day and become famous.
Right.
She simply provided the kindling. She said yes to his curiosity, she created the condition, and then she had the profound restraint to just stand back.
She let his identity find its own shape. And Holiday crystallizes this into a framework that applies just as well to mentorship or managing a team as it does to parenting, honestly. Our job is not to mold children or employees into our successors. Our job is to help them become who they are already meant to be. So the framework is simple. You expose them to the world, support their interest, believe in their capacity, and stand ready to catch them when they inevitably fall.
It is the ultimate refusal to enforce a rigid blueprint. The philosopher and martial artist Bruce Lee, he compressed this entire worldview into one famous maxim. He said, have no way is way, no limitation is limitation.
No way is way.
It reads like the anchor for every single source we've discussed today. Tolstoy's demand for real art, Godin's vision for ethical business, Holiday's approach to parenting, they all fundamentally reject the imposed, rigid way. They trust the internal architecture of the person or the project way more than the external demands of the system.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because if you accept Bruce Lee's premise, you have to look in the mirror and ask a deeply uncomfortable question. How often do we treat the people we manage at work, or our own kids, like commodity chocolate? How often are we optimizing the people around us for external metrics like grades, promotions, neighborhood status, instead of taking the risk of letting their authentic shape actually emerge?
And we lean heavily into external metrics because control offers this illusion of safety, right?
Yes, exactly.
Cultivation feels terrifyingly risky because you are actively surrendering the guarantee of what the final product is going to look like.
Which introduces a massive tension in this whole philosophy. Because when we talk about letting things be or letting an authentic shape emerge, it sounds incredibly passive.
Sure.
It sounds like you just kick your feet up on the desk, let the chips fall where they may, and do absolutely nothing. But our sources argue that refusing to force an outcome actually requires intense, exhausting discipline.
It is arguably the hardest work a human being can do. The text points us back to ancient Greece, actually, to the poet Hesiod. And Hesiod wrote beautifully about the virtue of the thrifty tongue. We also see this in the old fable of the wise owl, who saw more the less he spoke, and heard more the less he spoke.
Okay, I have to challenge this, though.
Right.
Because in a modern corporate environment, the thrifty tongue usually just gets you ignored.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right? Like if I sit in a Zoom meeting and practice profound silence, my boss doesn't think I'm a wise owl.
Yeah.
My boss thinks I'm disengaged, and I get passed over for the promotion. So how does silence survive in such a noisy world?
Well, Hesiod isn't advocating for a vow of muteness, right?
Yeah.
And he certainly isn't suggesting you become a pushover. He is talking about the internal discipline of restraint.
Okay.
It is the ability to listen deeply enough to hear the actual signal through the deafening noise of the world. Think about how often we speak in a meeting just to perform for the audience, just to prove we are in the room.
Oh, all the time.
Right. Hesiod is saying that figuring out what is actually true requires you to stop adding to the noise.
It's the discipline of keeping your hands off the steering wheel when every instinct you had is screaming at you to grab it and force a turn.
And the text issues a direct, almost aggressive challenge regarding how we use our time. It asks, are you inventing things to do to avoid the important work?
Wow, that hits right at the core. We substitute busyness for becoming.
Yes.
We fill our calendars with back-to-back, low-stakes obligations. Which brings us full circle to Chip Conley's opening quote. We stay frantically busy because the momentum of being busy saves us from the terrifying silence of having to figure out what actually matters.
The stakes for this evasion are absolute. The text shares a stark reminder. It says, don't be afraid of death. Be afraid of an unlived life. The real tragedy isn't that our time is finite. The tragedy is that we can spend our entire finite existence performing a life for an audience instead of actually living one from the inside out.
We engineer a persona instead of discovering a self.
Yes.
The writer Minna Antrim captured the brevity of this so beautifully. She wrote that the drama of life runs from a wail to a sigh.
That is beautiful.
It is a terrifyingly short arc. And the vast majority of what fills the space between that first wail and that final sigh is really just noise.
This raises an important question. If the arc is that short and the noise is that loud, what is the actual mechanism for taking back control?
Yeah.
How do we bend our obligations around our priorities?
Right.
The text points to the author Joyce Meyer, who observes that a positive attitude gives you power over your circumstances instead of your circumstances having power over you.
So attitude isn't just a mood, it's actually a structural tool.
It is the primary tool. If you let the external circumstances dictate your internal attitude, you are behaving like false art. You will spend your life reacting to the noise.
Yeah.
But when you take ownership of your orientation, you regain the leverage required to dismantle those inherited structures and build a life around what is actually true.
And crucially, the sources add one final caveat to make sure we don't turn this into a manifesto for total isolation.
Oh, right, yeah.
There is an old sports adage, talent wins games, but teamwork wins championships.
Meaning, you cannot become who you are in a vacuum. Even this deeply personal, internal process of cultivation requires a supportive ecosystem.
Definitely.
Godin's theory of horizontal, culture-driven change applies just as much to a locker room or a family or a friendship circle as it does to a global supply chain. You need people around you who are also committed to the garden.
Let's pull all these threads together. We have crossed 19th century art criticism, the global chocolate trade, rock and roll parenting, and ancient Greek poetry.
For quite a trip.
It really is. And across all of them, there is a unified, undeniable truth. There are no shortcuts. You simply cannot manufacture the real thing by force. You cannot command a spark to burn. You cannot compete your way into nobility. And you cannot engineer a human soul from the top down.
The only actual work we have is to create honest conditions, protect the silence required to notice what is true, and just trust the authentic shape to take form.
So, to everyone listening right now, I want to challenge you. Open up your calendar today. Look at your endless list of obligations. Look at the projects you are managing at work, and look at how you are interacting with your kids or your friends. Ask yourself a hard question. Are you constantly trying to command an outcome? Are you micromanaging the machine? Or are you tending the garden? Are you setting the conditions for success, stepping back, and letting things become what they are?
We've talked so much today about creating conditions for businesses to thrive and for children to become themselves. But if you were to apply this to your own mind, what is one condition or rule you've imposed on your own identity that you might need to completely dismantle tomorrow morning to actually find out who you are?